A young man was walking along the shores at Compton Bay in the Isle of Wight. It was just after 9 p.m, and the only sound was that of the waves lapping gently on the shore. He was savouring the tranquility of the night when he heard it. A low, droning sound in the distance. It sounded like some sort of distorted foghorn. He looked across the horizon, but saw nothing. No fog, no ships, but in his chest he felt a growing sense of unease, telling him something was wrong. The droning came again, louder this time. Whatever it was getting closer. He looked up and saw a wave surging towards him, and within seconds he felt it hitting his leg. He immediately recognised that this was a tidal surge, and if he didn't get off the beach soon, the waves would pull him out to sea. He looked around desperately and spotted a tall formation of rocks about 10 metres away and ran towards them. He scrambled up the rock face and breathed a sigh of relief as he reached the top. But before he had a chance to process what had happened, the droning came again. But from his new elevated position, he saw something he didn't see before. Something terrifying. Just inches below the water surface glowed two huge yellow eyes that appeared to be watching him. But as he stared, he realised these weren't eyes, but the periscopic lights from some underwater craft. After what felt like an eternity, the lights disappeared and the tide slowly subsided. Once the tide had fully retreated, he ran back to his car and sped home. When he got there, he found his daughter, Faye, waiting for him. He didn't tell her about his experience, but a short time later, she would have a disturbing experience all of her own. Welcome to Paranormal FM, your home of the strange, unexplained, and all things that go bump in the night. This is one of the most bizarre and unsettling cases I've ever come across. But if clowns from space is your thing, then you're in for a treat. This is a disturbing true story of the Sandown Clown. It was early in May 1973. Spring had sprung, and amidst the fields of newly blossomed flowers walked two children. A girl named Faye, who was 7, and a boy named Harry, who was around the same age. It was just after 4 p.m. when the picturesque scene was interrupted by a loud wailing. It sounded like an ambulance siren, but was more drawn out. They froze in their tracks and listened. It was unlike anything they'd ever heard before. They followed it across the golf links and through a hedge leading to a meadow next to the rarely used Sandown Airport. But as they approached a small wooden footbridge, the wailing suddenly stopped. An unnatural silence descended on the meadow. The children held their breath, waiting for the noise to return, but as they listened, Faye felt herself strangely drawn to the footbridge. She found herself remembering fairy tale warnings about evil trolls living under isolated bridges, waiting to catch and eat unsuspecting children. But then she reminded herself that she was 7, nearly 8 now, far too old to believe in fairy tales. She placed a tentative foot on the bridge, and almost as soon as she did, something moved underneath. She felt Harry tense up next to her. He saw it too. They gasped as a blue-gloved hand, with only 3 fingers, reached up and gripped the wooden walkway. They ran to the nearby undergrowth and watched as a large, hunched figure lumbered awkwardly into view. Everything about this figure looked uncomfortable and unnatural. Its legs moved in stiff, exaggerated motions. With each step, it raised its knees so high that it was almost hopping from foot to foot. It moved like it had studied and practiced the biomechanics of human movement, but couldn't quite pull it off. The figure held a book, which it dropped into the water almost as soon as it emerged from under the bridge. It reached down and splashed about awkwardly to retrieve it. It looked like it had never used its hands before. When it finally picked up the book, it lumbered stiffly away towards a windowless metallic hut. They continued to watch and waited for the figure to enter the building. Once it was inside, they agreed it was time to go and tell an adult about what just happened. They made it about 50 feet from the bridge when the figure re-emerged. In one 3-fingered hand, it held a black microphone attached to a white cord. The wailing suddenly returned, louder than ever. It scared Harry so much that he started to run. The wailing stopped, and the figure slowly raised the microphone to its mouth and spoke. "Hello? Are you still there?" It was the kind of question you'd ask on a phone call, not to someone you can clearly see. And even though it was 50 feet away, the voice sounded like it came from right next to them. Despite the metallic, robotic quality of the voice, the children heard a friendliness in its tone, and they slowly walked towards the strange figure. The first thing they noticed was its height. They knew it was tall when it lumbered out from under the bridge, but now it was fully upright. They saw it was around 7 foot tall. He had no neck. His head looked like it was wedged straight onto his shoulders, but stranger still were the clothes it wore. On its head was a yellow pointed hat which interlocked with the red collar of its green tunic. It was something a court jester would wear. A round black knob was affixed to the top of its hat, and where its ears should have been were 2 wooden antennae. It had triangular markings for eyes, a brown square of a nose, and yellow lips. It looked like a bizarre conglomeration of clown, court jester, and Tin Man from The Wizard of Oz. And as they got nearer, they saw its cheeks were paper white, and a fringe of red hair rested on its forehead. Although his first communication with the children was through the microphone, its next form of communication was written. It pulled out a notebook and started to scribble something on the paper. Faye watched intensely as its hands moved awkwardly over the paper and saw wooden slats protruding from not only its sleeves, but also from below its white trousers. When it finished writing, it held up the notebook. The message was in English, but the words were written in a way that made no sense. The figure must have sensed the children's confusion. because it then held a finger up to each word and gestured for them to read it aloud as he did. Harry was hesitant, but Faye followed his instructions and read out, "Hello, I am all colours Sam." Faye, now feeling emboldened or perhaps charmed by the affable nature of Sam, ventured closer, and Harry followed closely behind. Sam raised the microphone to his yellow lips and started to talk. He asked them several questions about themselves, and it was then the children noticed that although they could hear him, his lips didn't move. The children were now close enough to see rips and tears on Sam's clothes, and when they asked him why his clothes were in such bad condition, he explained they were the only set of clothes he had. The children asked if he was a man. Sam chuckled in response and said no. The children then asked if he was a ghost. Sam paused for a moment, as if considering his answer, before saying, "Well, not really, but I am, in an odd sort of way." Sam then told them that he didn't have a name. This was despite introducing himself as All Colours Sam just moments before. After this, Sam's reply to every question was a vague, "You know." He did, however, reveal that there were others like him, and he even drew a diagram of what they looked like. He told them he lived in the woods because he was afraid of people and frightened that they would hurt him for being different. He explained that if he were attacked, he wouldn't or couldn't fight back. This presented Sam as a harmless, almost whimsical character, and when he invited the now enchanted children back to his hut, they happily agreed to go with him. The children followed Sam to a small metallic rectangular hut. There was a flap covering a small opening on the side that they had to crawl through to enter. It was larger than it looked from outside, and once inside, Sam stood up and removed his hat, revealing round white ears and a head of sparse brown hair. The hut was made up of 2 levels. The lower level was spacious, with walls which were decorated with a blue-green wallpaper that was patterned with dials. All the furniture in the hut was made of wood. The only furnishing that wasn't wooden was the electric heater in the corner. The upper level was far less inviting. In addition to being a much smaller space, the floor was cold and metallic. The whole room had a much colder and sterile feel to the level below. As they sat around a wooden table, Sam vaguely told them he had an additional camp on the mainland where he would go to collect berries. He also told them that he would drink water from the river, but he had to clean it first. On the table was a small plate of berries, which Sam explained were the only things he ate. He then picked up one of the berries, clearly with the intention of eating it, but his method of consumption was perhaps the strangest part of this whole encounter. He placed the berry in his ear and thrust his head forward. The berry disappeared, then reappeared at one of his eyes. He thrust his head forward once more, and the berry travelled to his mouth. They continued talking for another 30 minutes, but the children, conscious that evening was approaching, decided it was time to leave. They said their goodbyes, and the children started walking home. Once the hut was out of sight, they became uncomfortably aware of the strangeness of what had just happened. It was almost as if they'd woken up from some sort of trance, and they were relieved when they saw a man repairing a fence post on the golf links. They ran over to him to tell him about their encounter, but he simply laughed it off and told them to go home. It was 3 weeks until Faye told her father about what happened. The story was so bizarre that at first he found it impossible to believe. But as she continued talking, he was struck by the remarkable level of detail in her story. Her descriptions of Sam and his behaviour sounded too vivid and too strange to be something she invented. Then, from the back of his mind, a memory stirred. 3 years earlier, he was driving from Shanklin to see a friend in Ryde. It had just passed 7 p.m, and the sun was beginning to set, but he wasn't worried. This was a drive he'd made many times before. He'd just passed through the village of Brading, indicating he was about halfway there, when he started to sense something was wrong, and that was when he saw it. An enormous, multicoloured craft was hovering soundlessly over the edge of the River Yar. He stopped the car and watched in disbelief. The craft was surrounded by a wide ring of 7 bright red lights, interspersed with turquoise and white. Whatever it was must have seen him, because when he drove away, the object followed his car and flew parallel with him. It was only when he reached the outskirts of St. Helens that it finally dropped back. By now, there were only 4 lights, which rotated slowly around the object. He stopped again and, torch in hand, stepped out the car. He waved the torch at the strange object in the sky, and to his amazement, the object started weaving side to side in response. This went on for about 10 minutes before he got back into his car and continued to his friend's house. The lights followed him the entire time, and when he arrived at his friend's, they saw it too. This would be the start of several sightings he had of red lights in the sky, all of which culminated with his terrifying encounter at Compton Bay. A disturbing thought came to him. What if this was all connected? He went to the area Faye described her encounter took place, but found no sign of Sam or his metallic hut. He asked the boy about what happened, and although he was reluctant to talk about it, he did confirm Faye's version of events. He was no closer to an answer and asked Faye to repeat her story as he meticulously documented everything she said. He was amazed by the consistency and details of her account, and became convinced that not only was her story true, but it was somehow connected to his own experiences. He sent a report into the British UFO Research Association, insisting that his identity and those of the children remain anonymous. But despite their expertise, they were unable to find an answer to what happened. So, in the absence of an explanation, the question remains: who or what was All Colours Sam? Ironically, the unbelievable nature of the case is what makes it so compelling. If all the children reported was a clown-like being that invited them round for tea, it would be easy to write off as a child's imagination. But the intricacy of the details points to the possibility that the children really did encounter something strange that day. The question is, who or what it could have been. If the children were making it up, then why did Faye wait so long to tell her father about what she had seen? And while it's possible the children embellished their encounter, some of the details seem too vivid and intricate to be simply made up. Publicity doesn't appear to be a motivating factor either, as neither Faye, her father, nor Harry have ever publicly come forward to talk about their experiences. But for all the talk of ghosts and aliens, there could be a more sinister, down-to-earth explanation. And that is that Sam was just a large man wearing a mask. This certainly fits with his lips not moving when he spoke. He may have put on a bizarre yet whimsical performance to put the children at ease. There are certainly overlapping themes that appear almost fairy tale inspired. The children, in their innocence, interpreted the whole performance as something wondrous and magical. Of course, this opens up the far more disturbing prospect of a deranged man in a clown suit walking the fields of the Isle of Wight in search of children to lure back to his hut. Although, if this was his intention, why did he let them leave? By all accounts, Sam was friendly and didn't do anything other than talk and eat berries. There is also the theory that Sam was a being not of this world and was simply taken on a form that he believed the children would be most comfortable with. Think Pennywise in Stephen King's It. There is also the theory that Sam was some sort of robot. But if Sam was a robot, who or what was controlling him? The children never claimed to have an encounter with an alien. In fact, they seem to have thought that Sam was some kind of ghost. Is it possible that Faye's father, having several UFO sightings prior to her encounter, was simply imposing a pre-existing bias onto his daughter's encounter? During an interview with the British UFO Research Association, he stated his belief that the reason the nearby workers didn't see the events was because Faye was somehow taken into a bubble of alien reality. He went on to say that he felt the incident was linked to his earlier sightings, and that the beings were engaging with his daughter as part of an ongoing process of monitoring and observing the family. There was, however, a small detail picked up by the British UFO Research Association in relation to how Sam ate the berries. They theorised that he could have been wearing some kind of protective mask that was analysing the berry to check it wasn't poisonous. But perhaps the best evidence to support the possibility of an extraterrestrial encounter is found not on the Isle of Wight, but over 200 miles away in the small Welsh village of Broadhaven. In February 1977, a group of school children reported seeing a UFO landing and a figure who bore a striking resemblance to All Colour Sam exit the craft. What makes this so compelling is that Faye's encounter with All Colour Sam wasn't published until February 1978, a year after the reported events at Broadhaven. How is it possible for two sets of children 200 miles apart to see the same thing? But that's a story for another time. That's all from Paranormal FM. Thank you for sharing your evening with me. If you enjoyed tonight's show, please remember to like, share and subscribe. Thanks again, and be sure to join me next time.